Hello, everybody. I hope you're doing okay. For the last class, instead of going over what we've learned together this semester, I want to give you some help with your PechaKuchas. So please watch this video because I have lots of help that I've put online for you, and I'm just going to go over it. With this help, you should probably be able to complete your PechaKucha in 4 hours. So I really want to help you go out with a bang in this class. I want you all to get A's. So I'm going to go over this PowerPoint that offers help, and then I'm going to upload it so that you can have a copy of it too. So welcome to the final class. I wish we were in a classroom together and wish you all the best. In the Human Thinking and Digital Culture Google Drive folder, I've added another folder called Help with PechaKuchas. And inside this Help with PechaKucha folder, I have 2 subfolders, Coronavirus and Human Tech, instructions for the final PechaKuchas, which you can also find on eCampus in the Final PechaKuchas folder under Assignments. And then I have these 2 things here, quotations and start your paper, and I will show you what those are as we go along. So this is the instructions for your final PechaKuchas document. The first part of it talks about how to make the slides, how to select images, and what to think about when you're selecting those images. The most important part is that the images you're going to select, or graphs or tables, they're going to enhance the understanding of the point you're trying to make. So when you select images, always think, what is the primary point of the image? What am I trying to achieve? If you choose a chart or graph, try to avoid junky charts. And there's a link there that explains what those junky charts are. But in general, the New York Times has really been praised for creating effective graphics, so you can always trust things from the New York Times. There's going to be a paper accompanying your slides this time, and so I've laid out here exactly how to write that paper. So write an introduction and state in it your main thesis. Then organize your paper by slide number, and then go over each slide. So I'm going to show you how this looks when you start it. In the PechaKucha's help folder, there's this document called Start Your Paper, and it looks like this. And it just shows you, here's an introductory paragraph, and it's stating my idea about what I'm going to present in this PechaKucha. And then I start with slide 2 because probably while I was reading this, I would have the title slide up. So slide 2, and then I would begin with writing for each slide. And so what you want to do is you want to state your point. You know, that you've got these images. What's the point? Ideally, you will cite the readings that we've done this semester, at least in a few of your slides. So I've also, in the Help PechaKuchas folder, put this document called Quotations. And it has a whole list of quotations in it. When you're using it, if you come to a quotation you like, you don't have to use all of that quotation. You can use any part of it. You can use a word, a phrase. You also don't have to use quotations from this document. You can use any quotations from our readings. The document is organized into 5 sections. Metaphors and thinking is one. Language and thinking is another. Models and thinking. Narrative thinking. Video games and thinking. So you'll find quotations under each one of these categories. And I just want to add here that this quotations document really provides a pretty good summary of all the kinds of thinking we discussed this semester, so you might just enjoy reading it. So state your point, cite readings where relevant, Then describe how the image is related to that point. Talk about that image. How is it composed? Where are things located in it? What is most striking about this image? And if it's a chart, just use these questions. If you just answer these questions about each slide with images and charts on it, your paper will virtually write itself. I was most worried about the people working on the technology prompt, finding metaphors of technology in everyday life. And so I've put a folder together that has some images in it. Here we are in this folder, but also a list of links. Since I've been home, I haven't been able to find any news other than about coronavirus. And I was hoping that you would just encounter news or tweets or Facebook entries that just talked about ordinary things and that they would sometimes use metaphors from technology. But that hasn't happened very much. So I've added even more images than you see here to this human tech folder, images that you can use. And then I have this psychology facts document. And it has links in it to surprising psychological facts. There are essays about it. So if you go to those links, you might find some psychological facts. And one thing to ask yourself is, why would they be surprising? Well, maybe because we don't usually talk about, or the ways that we talk about those psychological aspects of ourselves use metaphors that hide things. And so now we're surprised when we find those things out. That's what I'm hoping. So here's one that I went to. It's about procrastination. And it says, surprisingly, procrastination leads to creative thinking. Well, why would that be a surprise? So I Googled, how does procrastination work? And I went to one article. I couldn't find any metaphors in it. But then I went to this one, the real reasons you procrastinate. And I found a metaphor here. For many people, procrastination is a strong and mysterious force that keeps them from completing the most urgent and important tasks in their lives, with the same strength as when you try to bring like poles of a magnet together. So, there's a technology, a magnet, and when you're trying to bring like poles together, they repel each other. So that would be an example of a technology metaphor being used in describing an abstract idea, procrastination. I also stumbled across this article, How Well Can You Read Your Partner's Mind? And in it, there's a discussion of how people misread their partner's minds if they're being affected by what they call sentiment overdrive. And that means that whatever they're feeling about the relationship, override, whatever they're feeling about the relationship overrides what they are trying to think about what's being said. So I went to Etim online to look for the etymology of override, and found this, and it says, the mechanical sense to suspend automatic operation really didn't come into the language until 1946. So I went to the Oxford English Dictionary, remember how we did that in class, and found out that in 1949 at least, the first mechanical recording of the term is in an aeronautics glossary or dictionary. It's overriding the boost control. So that's a technological term being used to describe how human feelings work. Also, I've noticed a lot the mind being described as software and the brain as hardware. And so I included an image that might suggest such a thing in the human tech folder. There are a number of images there. You can explore and use them or find better ones. Then I thought, well, another thing we could do is we could look about how human metaphors are applied to technology. Like, for instance, motherboard, the motherboard of a computer. Why a motherboard? Well, it is the biggest board. I don't know if I think about mothers as the biggest person in the family, but it is connected. It and connects all the parts of the computer. So maybe it's about the connectivity, the relationship fostering of mothers. I'm not sure. Of course, a desktop, a computer desktop, isn't really a desktop, it's a screen. And these little icons are actually metaphors, visual metaphors. This is a visual metaphor for a real trash can. And this is a visual metaphor for a real folder. Remember, Geary says in I as an Other, what do you see when you switch on a computer? A desktop. These are all metaphors. That's on page 20. The other thing I thought is, if anybody's having trouble, like I did, in finding anything in the news except coronavirus, maybe I should let people just work on metaphors for coronavirus. So this folder contains some resources for you to be able to do that. Anybody who would rather work on a PowerPoint, a final PechaKucha, that's about the metaphors used for coronavirus may do so. In other words, you've been assigned a PechaKucha topic, depending on what group you're in, but if you prefer to do this, you may. So in this folder, I have a lot of images. Let's begin, though, by looking at the coronavirus metaphors. And this is what I noticed as I was looking through news at home. That coronavirus, the pandemic, is often being compared to war, metaphorically. There's the use of the word fight in everything and weapon. I see it in all the things that come up when I Google coronavirus. Now, fight, you think, well, that's not a metaphor, fighting disease. But actually, people didn't really start talking about fighting disease until the 20th century. I couldn't find disease in any entry, fighting disease, except this one in the OED. Now, of course, that doesn't mean that people didn't say fight disease before that. And then I went to the Google Ngram viewer and looked for the phrase fight disease. And you really don't see it before 1860. And really it starts to come into vogue around 1900. Now, Google Ngram doesn't have every text in it, but it does have a lot of books in it. So I was reading coronavirus news on my phone and saw this, America's war against coronavirus. That's a metaphor. A virus isn't a combatant in a war. It's not, the pandemic isn't a country that's attacking us that we can attack back. This is a shift in the metaphor, this little bit here. It's about how to deal with coronavirus psychologically and talks about how we are fighting for our psychological freedom. And it notes the metaphor. The coronavirus crisis is nothing like an actual war, but we are fighting psychological battles. So it takes up the metaphor and uses it a different way. I found some images that might suggest battle. This one here suggests that the coronavirus is a comet hitting the Earth. And also in the coronavirus folder, you'll find this document, Coronavirus Metaphors. Here's the war metaphor, and you can see it, the Prime Minister of New Zealand saying, "We have won that battle." So it's a war, and New Zealand has won. Is it good to talk about coronavirus as a war? I don't know, and here's an article that kind of discusses that. But what kinds of things are you supposed to be doing if we're at war? And who is the enemy? There are other metaphors used to describe the pandemic. What are they? I think that I've seen a lot of stemming the tide. So stemming the tide is putting something in front of a tide coming in to make it go around in two streams. It won't hit quite as hard. And then what about the terms we're using for staying safe? Lockdown, self-isolation, quarantine, social distancing. They all have implications. In fact, the World Health Organization has decided to stop using social distancing and to use physical distancing instead because they want people to get together socially on Zoom, but they want them to be social and not to stop being social. And I found this article in that Etymon online about the etymologies of the words that are now being used, like crisis and pandemic. You might find that interesting to look at. But what about lockdown? That's such a drastic term for what we're doing. It really implies prisons and bars, and it can be very anxiety-provoking to feel like you're imprisoned. So these are all aids for you to help you finish the final project. Also, if you could please today, now, if possible, go to pechaTamu.edu and log in as a student. I really want your input on what you liked and what you didn't like about this class. It's a class in the making, and I am teaching it again in the fall and would really love to have some input about what worked and what didn't. Thank you all so much, and I hope you will stay in touch. Be in touch with me for letters of recommendation or other things you need. Take care.